political advocacy panel. So first up, he is a JD candidate at the University of Chicago. He has led 2 different groups. Matt Enloe. She is in charge of the Youth Activist Committee at the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Give it up for Erin, Hagen. He is leading the charge against the state-funded art park in Kentucky. He's president of the Tri-State Freethinkers. Give it up for Jim Helton. Oh, he's not here?
He's talking to media about the art park, so he's being awesome, just not being awesome.
Oh, I didn't get that memo. I'm sorry. Okay, well, we don't get his presents then. But we get a couple other awesome people, including the co-founder of the Satanic Temple. If it were him, he would get a Baphomet statue next to every 10 Commandments statue. He's the one that your parents are worried about when you come to things like this. Lucien Greaves! All right, so we are going to run this panel a little differently. In this age of technology, you can go up here to goo.gul//, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but it will send your questions to my phone. I will be able to read them and put them in a probably coherent manner for our panelists so that we can get as many people's questions as possible. All right, so Matt, what is your claim to fame? Why are you up here on this stage?
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Enloe. I attended Oregon State University. I graduated in 2015 with a summa cum laude bachelor's in philosophy with a minor in psychology. I currently attend the University of Chicago Law School, where I will graduate next year with a Juris Doctor. I was the president of Advocacy for Free Thought and Skepticism, the SSA chapter at Oregon State University for 2 years, and grew it from a small monthly group of 3 people to a weekly group of 15 with a Facebook presence of more than 300 by the time I graduated. They are still ongoing to this day, and I'm very proud of the work that they continue to do. At the University of Chicago, I have revived from the dead the Secular Student Alliance chapter. My talk here last year was about the art of necromancy, bringing back groups and members from the dead. This year, I'll be talking about beating burnout and the art of getting by. For all of you people who think that it's just too much sometimes, I can tell you how to do everything and more. Because this year, I will be the president of 5 law school student organizations and on the boards of 5 more, plus other national and campus involvement and stuff around the city. I am in the interesting position of being unable to make political commentary at the moment due to the Hatch Act, but I can tell you all about the fun things that I've done in the past and some great organizations for you to get involved with. So this year I'll be a programmer for the American Constitution Society, which is an organization at many law schools. If your university's law school doesn't already have an ACS, you should talk to some people at the law school about getting one started. There are chapters all across the country being founded every day. If you lean more on the libertarian and conservative side of things, you should look into the Federalist Society. You might not expect it, but they do some interesting work related to church-state separation, and you might be able to push them to some bipartisan efforts. I know that those 2 organizations are both 501c3s, so they do not engage in partisan political activity, which is why I can talk about them. But they do some very interesting policy work, and as secular folks, I know that you sure are interested in policy. And so those are some really interesting organizations to look at getting involved with. I definitely know that prior to law school, I didn't really have an understanding of what went on in the world beyond universities and student groups. And what I hope to be able to offer to you in answering your questions, more than just talking about myself, is some insight into what you can do both while you're still in school, but then in terms of building your own lifelong brand and becoming the sort of person to stay involved in things long after you graduate with your degrees and move on to bigger and better things.
Cool. Right, Erin, Youth Activist Committee. I'm sure that there's some real cool people on that, right?
Oh yeah, I think one of them is at the table with me. So thanks, Pete. My name's Erin Hagen, and like Pete said, I work with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and it's kind of all in the name. But in addition to doing youth outreach and organizing, I work with kind of our broader grassroots community currently, and so kind of through two channels. We have a lot of folks that come to us with violations happening in their community, whether that be a cross or religious symbol on government property, religious material in public school textbooks, things like that. And we also have a really fabulous legislative team that tracks state and federal legislation. And so when we have something that crops up, we work with our grassroots activists to help them either educate their communities or their member of Congress to make sure that that piece of legislation doesn't pass. And in thinking about advocacy, when I was kind of going back into some of my history in the last 10 years that I've done advocacy and organizing, I realized that I've been kind of all over the map. And I think, and have done a little meandering, and I think that's okay. And I think that's actually has been really useful for me in finding my way to Americans United, actually. And so I've done some campaign work. This makes me look, this is now many years ago, but back in 2012, I worked on a campaign in Minnesota called Minnesotans United for All Families, and this was back when states were trying to pass bans on same-sex marriage. And so that was a canvassing campaign, and I worked largely in rural northern Minnesota, which was a very, interesting experience in itself. I've also done work with League of Women Voters. I, at one point, was very interested in educating people about voter IDs and other voter suppression laws. And in addition to that, I've also done some grassroots level organizing, so kind of at all three levels, and that ranged from environmental stuff. So worked with my local community members at one point. They wanted to have tennis courts right next to the Mississippi River, and after an environmental impact report came out showing that that would be funneling chemicals directly into the Mississippi River, we did some organizing and around that issue, and then also lots of different feminist and women's groups, including some performance advocacy. And so I think, Pete, is this at the time where I can kind of give my thoughts on how to replicate? Okay. So thinking back through, I guess there are three kind of nuggets that I think have been really helpful to me in the past 10 years. One, I would say, go listen to people who have been doing this a lot longer than you are and are better. Read their books, ask them questions, track them down. Also, try out a lot of different things and work with many different people. So you may have your particular issue that you're very, very invested in, and that's great. But also just kind of see where things take you. I think organizing and advocacy work is really relational. So the more people you can get to know, I think the better you'll be at the work you do. And then the third, get good at making plans and setting goals. I think this is how you'll really, you won't really be able to measure your success if you don't, set a bar for that. And I think that's really important as well. So thank you.
All right, so Lucien, if we weren't all damned to hell already, you being here has probably sealed the deal. So tell us, what have we given up our immortal souls for?
Depends on you, I guess. I started this about 4 or 5 years ago now, I think, and my first exposure to the media was me putting my testicles on the grave of the mother of the founder of Westboro Baptist Church in a ritual that was presumed to turn her into a lesbian in the afterlife. Even though we said that we didn't believe in the supernatural aspects of this, we said that they were obligated to believe that the Westboro Baptist Church was, because our belief was that they had to believe it, and belief is inviolable. due to the Supreme Court finding in their favor that belief wasn't viable. So it was a commentary on that, but soon we moved immediately into the Baphomet campaign, where we had made a monument, a goat-headed, is everybody aware of this? What it looks like, a humanoid goat-headed sabbatic goat, to complement and contrast a privately donated Ten Commandments monument in Oklahoma. It was privately donated and said not to be an Establishment Clause issue because it was going to be a limited open forum to other monuments of any type of religious opinion or persuasion, so long as it fell within certain parameters. So we tested that theory, and the Supreme Court of Oklahoma ultimately called for the Ten Commandments monument to be taken down. We're not sure how much of an influence we had on that. We're fighting that same fight in Arkansas right now, and we feel we have an even stronger case there, but I'll talk about that tomorrow. We have after-school clubs, after-school Satan clubs for children in schools in school districts that host good news clubs. These are evangelical little indoctrination camps that are often used as an hour-long kind of babysitting outlet for parents who don't know that their children are being indoctrinated into hellfire and brimstone by a very fundamentalist, isolationist, evangelical, sick-headed kind of cult. And we're going to be pressing litigation in different school districts that have ignored our request but still have the good news clubs in place now. Similarly, in schools where they offer biblical materials, we've offered satanic materials, thus shutting down the limited open forum. We've offered displays wherever there's been limited open forums. We've offered invocations before city council meetings, causing some of them to opt for a moment of silence. In effect, there's this term that's come up now, Lucien's Law in my honor, which I'm rather proud of, being that when the Satanists come, that they will either reject us opening themselves up to litigation, or they will close down the limited open forum that they meant to only benefit evangelicals to begin with. A little known bit of activism we get involved in is in the mental health profession. There was the Satanic Panic, what the sociologists call it, in the 80s and 90s, where there was this phenomenon of people recovering memories of satanic ritual abuse that never occurred. What was happening was these conspiracist therapists were using this kind of debunked therapy to probe people's minds for memories they knew were repressed, and drawing forth memories that they were sure were there, of a satanic cult conspiracy, very similar to the, or exactly the same really, but in narrative form, to the alien abduction phenomenon, past life regression, everything else. And these things still take place. People are still pushing to put the Satanic Panic forward, and we're really the only ones taking an aggressive stand, trying to get specific therapists to lose their license. And if I were to give any piece of advice on activism, it would be to stop trying to be so moderate and apologetic and conciliatory. Whenever I get on these interviews, people ask these questions to ask me to justify Satanism, and they'll say, well, you know, a lot of people think you murder babies and things like that. And earlier on, I used to explain that it's not us at all, and that's not what we believe. But lately, my reply has pretty much been, well, who gives a fuck? You open the door. You know, you open the door to any religious belief when you open up the limited public forum, and you have to accept the consequences of that. We could be everything you thought we were, but you have to respect the law. And I think if you start trying to justify yourselves, you're giving the impression that you are only allowed to participate at the largesse of the larger audience, whether they approve of you or not.
All right, so our first question comes from Liz. How can we stay energized and avoid burnout when it seems like there's always something new to fight against?
Well, you should start by coming to my talk on Sunday at 10:30, because I'm going to talk about beating burnout in the art of getting by. But I think more generally, it's important to not miss the forest for the trees, especially in the current landscape, regardless of whether you're talking about politics or just day-to-day emotional life as a student. It can be really, really easy to get bogged down in that one assignment or that one thing that's happened recently. And you have larger goals. You are here for a degree, for a job, for something. You came here for a reason. The article that stuck with me the most was published right before I started school as a freshman and was addressed to incoming freshmen, so it was quite a happy coincidence. It's called Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here by Mark Edmondson. And I reread it every single quarter before classes start because it renews the vigor in me that I had when I first entered college and reminds me that there's something inside of me that's driving me to do what I do. And I think that finding what that is for you is going to keep you motivated, passionate, hardworking. There is something here for you. There is something in the world for you. You feel that something has to change and that you can be the one to do that. And I think it's important to keep that in focus. Figure out what it is, write it down, find a way to memorialize it for yourself so that you can go back to it whenever you need to.
That's great. I would just add, I think that the structure of the Second Wave Student Alliance groups is such that you already have a fantastic support system. So I would just say to use that. Thinking back to when I was in different groups in college, you know, sometimes we would meet and sometimes we would just need to hash out some things that were happening that were maybe outside the group's purview, and do that with your group, do that with your friends, but find that support system. And then also, this is something that some advice that was given to me after the election, and that the Trump administration, unlike administrations beforehand, is just, and we're feeling this at our organization too, where there's just something new every single day. And so, you know, you can read the news at the end of the day. You don't have to be on Twitter all day. So I think it's helpful to find healthy ways to digest some of the things that are coming in and kind of section those off for your mental health and sanity.
Self-care isn't selfish.
Was a question.
How can we stay energized and avoid burnout when it seems like there's always something new to fight against?
Oh, you have to keep your disgust and loathing alive. You have to look at the worst case scenarios and be apocalyptic about it, and be very fatalistic and assume that the worst is going to happen. You have to wake up every morning in a nightmare sense of dread, knowing that everything is on a path to certain ruin, and that nothing you can do can stop it, but you're going to die fighting. You're gonna die with, at your very last breath, you're gonna be clawing at the eyes of your opponent, and you're going to be telling them that you may be going down, but you're not going down without a fight. And I really think that's the situation we're in right now. I mean, I certainly can't withdraw from it in the Google age, as people just, I can't get any other kind of job. I'm just doing this. I'm a lifer, so I'm already completely ruined. So as for me, how I'm gonna manage to maintain this, honestly, I can't do anything else.
All right, what do you guys think political advocacy will look like in 10 years, and how should we get a jump start on that?
I think that it would be foolish to try to predict what it will look like. I think that you should do what is available to you and what feels important to you, because that's what people have done basically forever, and it's led to some pretty cool things. I think that a point was made earlier by, I think Gordon, that the most interesting things that people come up with and do for their student groups are brand new. They just have this idea that they're going to build on something else. And I think that's sort of how life works generally. I don't think that this is limited to political advocacy either. Some of the most creative, inspiring, engaging, entertaining things that exist in life are just the result of someone having a good idea and deciding to pursue it. And I think that trying to jump too far ahead of the future can sometimes be disastrous. Like I'm sure all of us at least watched one episode of That's So Raven. Even though she could see the future, no matter what she would try to do to stop it, it would eventually catch up to her. And I think that is a decent lesson. I think that you might be more empowered by knowing a lot about the past than the people who have come before you and the lessons that they've learned. Listen to what they have to say, learn from their advice, because they don't want you to make their mistakes.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here trying to think what 10 years is going to be, and just.
Are you telling us you're not psychic?
Well, I'm dreading the next 3 years a little bit, but no, you know, in 10 years, I guess I would say that my hope, and I think that this is going to be the case, is that we're going to have a lot more of you all in positions of leadership, and I'm forgetting her name. Who's the SSA called? staff member who was talking about how the work that young people do is and needs to be more intersectional. And Sam, thank you. And I think that's really important, and I think that will that our generation, the millennials, I hate that term, I don't know why, you know, need to lead that charge. And so I think that whatever you all can do to put yourselves in leadership positions, I think will ensure a much better future.
Yeah, certainly we need to do something about the current administration, and it's hard to say what can be done. I think that's what everybody's wondering about, and where it goes from there. I think we're in a much more dire state than people realize. I think Enlightenment values themselves are under direct assault, and I think it's been being chipped away at for many decades now. The evangelical nationalists have been on the rise for a certain amount of time. That's been the slow boil to the frog that just ends up dying without realizing it. That all of a sudden we're looking at the very real prospect of theocratic encroachments in the United States. And I feel that this demands a much larger response than has currently been given. I know people have taken to the streets, but they've taken to the streets in a very kind of facile way. These kinds of cosmetic protests where people go out and just hold out signs for one day and then go home and feel like they've done their part when it's not related to any push for specific legislation or specific moves politically. I think that's that's actually a big mistake. That's a squandered use of resources and energy. I think a real large part of the problem is to get people to think more fatalistically and look at things in not so positive terms, and make people understand the fact that this idea that we're ever progressing isn't necessarily the case, and we have taken very many steps backwards in very recent times. So, sorry to crap all over those good feelings.
What is the best way to keep religious imagery, and I guess religion at all, from being displayed on public land?
That one's all you. I can't.
Well, I mean, obviously, you make them consider which religion they're talking about. But like I said, with the fatalistic mindset earlier on, people laughed more at what the Satanic Temple was doing, because it seemed we had a very obvious argument and it was very obvious that we would win. But the balance of the courts is such now that we really do have to worry that no matter how well our legal argument is constructed and how well we think precedent is on our side, it will be overturned in drastic ways, and the rulings will just be absolutely unjust. We've seen several such rulings in recent times. Even the ruling that allowed for the Good News Clubs to go into public schools was wildly out of hand, and that was when Scalia was still alive. And now with Gorsuch, we can look at Scalia as being a more moderate voice. And I will never forgive Obama for not pushing to actually have to put a Supreme Court justice in place. But the best we can do now, I think, is really fight for pluralism and really fight for people to recognize this notion of religious liberty for what it actually is. And I do think you can find common ground with a lot of conservatives, and in a best case scenario, will drive a wedge in those conservative factions that are constitutional purists and the ones that are disingenuous religious theocrats. And I get some of that reaction when I go on right-wing talk shows. I'll start using the rhetoric of religious liberty in saying, you know, if you want to live in some theocracy, why don't you go to the Middle East or something like that, when they're talking about putting up a Christian monument to the exclusion of a satanic monument. And it's really confusing to them because that's the language they're used to using, and they don't generally want to speak in a way that's flagrantly in violation of the First Amendment, as everybody who's the least bit honest about it will understand it. So, I mean, we can only force the issue and get people to recognize what's actually happening in hope that there's enough of a division within conservatives to allow this to kind of level off.
I mean, I'll just add that this is also an issue that Americans United works on, and it's a tricky issue from the 2 years that I've been working there, in that, you know, oftentimes if there's someone that brings this to us from the community, it's a really, they don't want to go public with this complaint. They're probably one of the only people in the community that's willing to be vocal about this, and so oftentimes we do write legal letters. Occasionally it's the situation where, whether or not this is the truth, people will say that they just didn't know. But other times, like what happened last week, we had written a letter to a university, and some of the religious right news sites got wind of it, and you know, it blew up, and and so yeah, I would say that this is, I mean, I'll concur with you a lot what you said, that it's just a really a tricky issue, and one that, you know, more often than not is sometimes safer for people to fight out in the courts than it is to do organizing for it.
Well, we get a lot of people coming to us, the Satanic Temple now, who we then refer to Americans United, Freedom from Religion Foundation, the American Humanist Association. We've worked with all these organizations, but we have a kind of different market. So people come to us because they know about us, and they don't know about these other secular organizations. So I think we've kind of opened the market in a way. But something you need to realize about people writing these letters and willing to come out and give us standing in their communities, some of them, they're willing to lose their lives. And I'm not shitting you, that's not hyperbole. People are really scared for their safety and their lives and their communities in doing this. So it's certainly, I mean, I know a lot of people look at what the Satanic Temple does and they think that it's hilarious and it's a really great prank and things like that. But it's not that kind of fun when you see some of the heart-wrenching letters we get from people, and when even in Belle Plaine with the, I can't assume you all know about that, but we're putting up a Veterans Memorial now, and we have people in the community over there in Minnesota who are willing to stand with us when this monument is erected, and that they have very serious safety concerns and things like that. I mention that because there is a real value in coming forward and letting your voice be known, and I realize that others might be afraid also, but the more people do come forward, the safer it is for everybody. Everybody has to consider that balance, but staying silent after a while is hurting the people who are coming forward, and it's helping the opposition. So if you can do it to any degree or capacity, you really should, and now's the time.
And because I'm sitting at this table, I'm going to add, heck off. Some of the strongest work I've seen against these kind of religious infractions, I've seen be from coalitions of not just atheists, but also working together with Hindus, First People, Muslims, progressive Christians, because it's easy for a lot of politicians, I think, to discount, oh, it's just the atheists causing a ruckus. But when it is a lot of different faiths, a lot of different people from the community, that is much harder to ignore. So I cannot overemphasize how important interfaith work is for all of you students to do when you go back to your groups. All right, our next question was kind of brought up a little bit. How can the secular community reach out to conservative/libertarian secularists?
Talk to them. And I know that sounds like a super simple answer, and it's kind of because that's what it is. I think that the conversations that you have are going to be difficult and probably make you angry frequently. They might not always end well, but if you want to build bridges with those people and have relationships with them, just like the uncle that you don't get along well with but still have to see at Christmas dinner, you have to talk to them. You have to invest your time and energy into that person and show them that you really do care about them and building a relationship with them. Because why would they be interested in you if you're just there to try to monopolize them for your own personal gain? You have to show them that they have something to gain from the relationship. And you have to be willing to give them something from the relationship. No healthy relationship is a one-way street. And it's important to recognize that if you are sincerely interested in doing the work necessary to build it. Whether or not you decide that that's ultimately worth your time is, I think, a personal choice.
You know, I would say that in conversations that I've had, I think an easy hook to talk about the constitutional principle of church-state separation, to use language like a secular government protects the integrity of the government and the integrity of houses of worship. Oh, sorry, what was the question? It's secular conservative people, right?
Secular conservative people, but I think that extending it to just general libertarians and conservatives is warranted.
Okay, great. So kind of language like that the separation of church and state, the barrier between institutions, protects both. In the work that I do, this is why I went there automatically, is because a lot of the conservatives that come to, that we try to engage with are religious. But I would also say that it's just largely dependent on what you're trying to get them to do. And so I think that in a case-by-case basis, anytime you're trying to bring someone into what you're doing, your first point of contact should be figuring out where some of your beliefs intersect. I think that's, but also, it doesn't always work, and that's okay too, because there's lots of people out there doing this work.
Well, this goes back to what I was saying about driving a wedge between the constitutional purists and the theocrats. The theocrats are going to be the theocrats, but a lot of the conservative libertarians like to believe that they follow the Constitution. Even the theocrats do as well, even though they have a different kind of interpretation of it. But it's really difficult for them to admit to having the government act as an arbiter of what's proper religious expression. And when you start asking them if that's what they really want, if they really want a government that is dictating to people what is proper religious expression and what is not, their knee-jerk response is going to be no. And that's a proper response. And these are the kinds of questions we bring up with the Satanic Temple, asking to put a display or asking for equal placement along with other religious voices. Another kind of concept to put out to them is the idea of the government taking ownership of a religious voice rather than speaking their religious voice or giving their religious voice preference. It's the government claiming a certain type of ownership of that, similar to them putting up the Ten Commandments monument and saying it's a historical document rather than a religious document to avoid an Establishment Clause case. You can very easily spin that so that it offends the religious people. Here it is the government telling them this is not a sacred document, that this is merely a legal document. And I think if you put things into them in the terminology of real religious liberty, in real secularism, not meaning that religion can't have a voice in the public square at all, but that the government needs to remain neutral, that has a real appeal to the conservative and libertarian factions, because that's something that speaks to this notion that we should disempower the government. We shouldn't allow the government to encroach on religion in that way. And I think if you contextualize it in that way, and it doesn't take very long in the conversation because these are often very simple-minded people, you can make that case very effectively.
Cool. Next one from Sean. Many nonpartisan subjects have been forced into a partisan light, such as the neutral ending of gerrymandering has become a very partisan issue. How do you pitch these initiatives to groups with mixed political ideologies?
That's a really good question. That's a good question. I'm thinking through other things that have been like facts and science. So can you just say the question one more time?
Yeah, so how do you pitch what seem to be bipartisan issues, things that should benefit either side of the aisle, let's say a road construction or something like that? How do you get it so that groups with mixed political ideologies agree that this is something that should move forward?
I mean, I think this is a little, my answer might be a little bit similar to the last question in that, anytime in my, experience, anytime that I was looking to go in and do coalition work with, you know, a group of people or a group of organizations that, you know, we may have connected on one issue, right? We may have, I'm trying to think of a specific example, and it's escaping me, but, you know, but then, you know, the missions of our organizations or of the people involved in this coalition work were quite different. And so I think that you really have to make a decision about what you are and aren't willing to compromise. You know, I know that this is probably not super popular to say, but you should be very, I think in this political atmosphere in particular, I hope that you all are very conscious of not putting people in your group in a position where you're trying to work with someone who is threatening to other people in your group, right? I mean, I think you need to be aware of that, and that's really important when you do coalition work. But that being said, to locate those intersections of where you all, to build from that. So in the example of gerrymandering, to build from a place of that voting and other types of political efficacy are really like foundational to democracy, right? And to take those threads and to build on them to where you find commonalities. I think that's what I would say, yeah.
So speaking as an individual and without taking any particular political issue or any stances, I will say that effective bipartisan efforts usually centralize around a framing issue. I think that a lot of disagreements that happen, regardless of what the issue is, are the result of people just having different frames of the same general set of values or set of facts in play. And as I'm sure many of us well know, the way that you tell a story can often seriously influence the way that people interpret it. So if you are looking at involving a specific group to work with you, you should really understand what their view of an issue is and why they hold that view, because if you can get to the why, then you might be able to tell a story that better aligns with yours, but still addresses their underlying interests.
I guess you just focus on the principle that you're putting forward rather than anything else. I think that's the easiest type of pitch. You really can't dress it up any other way. If you're standing on principle and you believe in what you're doing, you just pitch it in a very straightforward manner based on that. Especially if you're going people with mixed political persuasions, you'll either find common ground or you won't.
All right. We are approaching the end, so we're going to try a little lightning round, try to keep the answers as brief as you can so we can get some of these last ones in. All right, this is a question I think is pretty important. How can we balance our responsibilities with the activism that we want to do?
Very carefully, with a lot of use of Google Calendar.
I would say just check in with yourself very frequently.
Yeah, no, I haven't figured that one out at all.
I have some specific questions for each of you. Erin, you mentioned that the AU has a legislative team. What is your favorite piece of legislation that no one has heard of yet?
Favorite piece of legislation. I hate all of the legislation we work on because we're constantly on defense, but I would say that there's a lot of really awful, terrible state legislation that's flown under the radar largely, having to do with states giving religious adoption agencies. They've used a religious freedom argument to be able to deny adoption to same-sex couples, single mothers, divorced parents, and I know Texas and South Dakota both have that happen this year.
Lucien, how does the Satanic Temple find or choose the opportunities when you guys want to step in?
Oh, well, that's usually just a matter of resources and people available. We have, of course, chapters nationwide, so we have standing in a lot of areas. So if people contact us and people are willing to go public, put their name on documents or whatever, and give us legal standing, that's one thing. But for the most part, we've got so many things that we could be doing that it's just a matter of being able to take them on or not, whatever our opportunities are. So a lot of stuff we throw towards processing, towards the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United, if they're church-state issues, if it's something that's particularly something we can take care of, or something that can be embodied in one of our current campaigns, that's something we usually absorb pretty quickly.
Okay. Matt, real briefly, what was the book that you mentioned?
Oh, it's actually an online article. You can Google it. I'll have a link to it in my slides, and those will be posted online. It's called Who Are You and What Are You Doing Here? It was published on the website for the Oxford American. But he actually has written a number of books. The author's name is Mark Edmondson. The great first book of his that you should read is called Why Read? Very simple. He also has a great book called Why Teach, and he recently published a wonderful one called Self and Soul, A Defense of Ideals, if you're interested in something to get your idealistic self back on track.
Erin, can you tell us about the Rainbow Rumpus?
Yes. And did I put that in my bio?
Someone found it somehow.
Well, I'm sad to say that the Rainbow Rumpus actually no longer exists, but a number of years ago I worked with this awesome little nonprofit. And it was the first online magazine for kids with LGBTQ parents. And an acquaintance of mine started it when she and her partner were reading a magazine with their daughters, and they saw two women with a little girl, and they said, "Oh my gosh, that's just like our family." And she realized that there was no representation of that, and it was an awesome magazine. I think it's archived if you want to go look it up. But yeah, I'm happy to have worked for that.
All right. And last question before we get to the finals. What is an example of an advocacy initiative that you think a campus group can start locally that is almost guaranteed to be successful and then can be built off of to do more?
I have to pass on this one for ethical reasons. Sorry, y'all.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
What's an example of an advocacy program or initiative a campus group can start with locally that is almost guaranteed to be successful and then can be built off to do more?
Almost guaranteed to be successful.
I can answer something while you guys think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you guys know, with that recent decision, or I guess it's not super recent, that allows for prayer to be said before government meetings. Those still have to be of multiple faiths, including non-religion. So if your local government building is doing these prayers before a government meeting, you can probably get in and schedule yourself to do a secular invocation. We have actually had several student groups do this. Just keep it, not super inflammatory, but really emphasizing the secular worldview and how we should all work together, even though we might have religious differences. Those are always really great for the news, and sometimes you get someone acting naughty when you're there, and it makes it explode even more. Barbra Streisand effect.
Campus crusade for Satan. It can't fail.
I would say, host an interfaith panel. Because if the goal of your interfaith panel is for people to learn about different viewpoints, then you can't fail.
Excellent. All right, so because we're running out of time, this is a few moments for you guys to give some final thoughts about what these students can do, go out, experience, and learn from you guys regarding political advocacy.
My family got me a megaphone for Christmas a few years ago, and it was a gag gift, I think. It ended up being useful, and I bring it to things, and I use it myself, but one of the most important things that I do with it is I pass it around. I offer it to people who are near me and think that it's cool. I give them the chant sheet that gets given to me. And I think that other people should do the same thing. It turns out that megaphones are pretty cheap. You can get them on Amazon. And the batteries for them are pretty cheap too, or you can get, I think, even rechargeable ones. I don't know. Point being, it's really, really easy to be the cool person that you looked up to at that thing that you went to. All you have to do is start, and if you need advice on how to get started, you should talk to one of us.
I would just reemphasize something I said earlier in that try a lot of different things and work with a lot of different people, and that this work is relational. Not only will you build up your advocacy chops in doing this, when you graduate from college and you look back, you'll have a resume.
I would just say concede nothing and be proud of losing family and friends to what you're fighting for on principle, and don't allow a single step back. Don't assume that if you give the opposition one thing, like allowing to put in God we trust on money, or a monument to a specific religion on public grounds, that they will then shut up, because then they're just using that as license for the next step. So not only should you be fighting on for things going forward, you should be fighting retroactively against things that are already an infringement upon your rights.
Well, I thought you guys were going for a little bit longer, so we actually still have some time for a couple more questions. Since August will be, this is his last SSA con, I'm going to give him this question. What can we do to nurture our inner troublemaker?
Not get arrested so that you can keep doing things.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't get arrested.
Also, if you want to be an attorney someday, it's good to not have been arrested, even before you start law school. But while you're in law school, if you even get a ticket, it's not going to be fun for you in front of the character and fitness committee, just saying.
I would say engage in tricky conversations, and with people that you may totally disagree with, and use that as a chance to practice getting good at having those conversations, but also like speak your truth, speak your mind.
I don't know, asking this question to me is like asking somebody without shame. I don't know, I don't see anything I do as trouble, so that's somebody else's problem.
It seems each of you have a different approach to organizing. Student groups, grassroots organizing, and legal challenges. What drives your approach to political advocacy, and when are these approaches most and least effective?
Well, I mean, I'm a student, so that's why I'm involved with student groups. I'm entering my last year of law school, and I will then no longer be a student, and if I want to do things, I will have to not be doing them through student groups. And I'm actually really looking forward to that, but I'm also really scared by it, because I think that, like, the 25 to 55 crowd doesn't really have a well-defined organizational structure for things happening. University students have very clear options for how to get engaged with the issues that they care about, regardless of what those issues are. There are student groups for everything, and if one doesn't exist, you can start one. And the same is true of nonprofits and general community organizations. It's always the case that you can start one, but I think it's a little bit harder. The space to navigate is a little bit more murky. People are a little bit more caught up living life, because in university you study and then you have free time. In life, you have bills to pay and people to take care of. The world sort of depends on you in a much bigger way. The stakes are a little bit larger. And I think that one thing that I'm personally working on is how to navigate all of the different spheres that I'm going to find myself thrust into. And it's something to think about before you even finish your time as a student, because the world is going to keep changing, both in terms of your personal world and the spheres that you navigate, and the larger global spheres. We've seen drastic changes very quickly, regardless of what your opinions are on them. And it's important to know what to do. So even though I have an approach to activism that is centered on my status as a student, I'm also thinking about the things that Lucien and Erin talk about, and how to navigate that world, because I'm a student and find myself in it.
I would say that my draw towards more grassroots advocacy, I think that legal and legislative advocacy is extremely important, but also to know that there's a huge a huge need for, I guess we would call it changing hearts and minds. And so building relationships, telling stories of real people doing real things works. It's effective with political leaders, it's effective with community leaders, and so this, whatever your interest is, if you want to go to law school, if you want to be involved in legislative advocacy, if you want to be an organizer, they're all needed. They're all really, really important. And for me, I've always been drawn to having conversations with people, telling stories, and working with lots of different people.
I concur with the need for narrative, and in fact that kind of gets into the argument for non-theistic religion, and I think it's a real mistake for atheists to rally against religion all the time. What we should really be fighting against is superstition and supernaturalism, and I think as an item of religious opinion, atheist organizations should fight for legal representation, legal recognition as religious organizations based on the fact that they hold very distinct religious opinions, in that often these organizations have a very kind of defined set of ethics and political stance. That is to say that they should be able to make arguments based upon conscience that certain government restrictions or encroachments are such an affront to their sense of cultural identity and their ethics that they should be able to make a religious claim. So to define yourself out of a protected class on some kind of petulant idea that if Timmy is having ice cream too, you don't want any or whatever else, is just is an absolute mistake.
I'll finish off by saying that according to our positive definition of secular, secular is someone whose identity and values are based exclusively on the reality of the naturalistic world. When you do that, you aren't just an atheist, you expand your horizon to all kinds of things, because this is one life that we have to live, and it's the same thing for everybody else. Anything that we do has consequences all across the globe and within our own community. So by engaging in a lot of political activities that help everyone have a better chance at life and living this life to the best of their ability, I think is a worthwhile cause and something that I'd like to get involved in. All right, well that is time. Give it up for our panelists.